Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the October 13th meeting of the Memphis and Shelby County Land Use Control Board. My name is Desiree Lyles Wallace, and I will be serving as your chairperson today. We will begin this morning's meeting with a roll call. Mr. Ragsdale, would you please proceed?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Gill? Here. Ms. O'Connell? Here. Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Mr. Tolles?
Here.
Ms. Wilbanks?
Here.
Vice Chair Sharp?
Here.
Dr. Pritchard?
Here.
Dr. Pritchard?
Here.
Here. And Chair Lyles Wallace?
Here.
McKinnon, here.
Mr. McKinnon?
Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale. I would like to remind you that copies of today's agenda are located at the front right podium if you need them. If you wish to be a speaker on any case that is on today's agenda, please fill out an attendance or speaker's card located at the front podium. Once you have filled out the card, please bring it up front and hand it to one of our DPD staff members located at the left podium. When that agenda item is called, you will be given an opportunity to speak. At this point, I would like to read our conflict of interest statement. The adopted policy of the Land Use Control Board requires that any member of the board recuse himself or herself from any participation in the discussion or voting on any matter on the meeting's agenda in which he or she may have direct or indirect personal interest. The member shall vacate his or her seat during a deliberation on any matter from which they have recused themselves. An abstention may substitute for a recusal for the purposes of maintaining a quorum. I would like to now get approval of our minutes from the last meeting.
I so move.
I second. Okay, we have a motion by Dr. Pritchard and a second by Vice Chair Sharp. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Right, the motion carries. Mr. Ragsdale, may I please get a secretary's report for this month and an explanation of today's procedures?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a secretary's report, but I just will note that we do have Chair Lyles Wallace substituting in to get just a little practice on this. So Chair Sharp offered that, and so we appreciate you doing that for us this morning. And we don't have a director's report either this morning, so I'll go into the procedures. At the beginning of today's meeting, we will establish a consent agenda for those items where no one in the audience or on the board is requesting an individual public hearing. After the consent agenda is established and approved, we will move on to the regular agenda. For each case on the regular agenda, the DPD planner will give a presentation. This will be followed by the applicant's presentation and testimony from others who support the application. The applicant and supporters will be given a total of 10 minutes. Following each speaker, the chair will ask the board members if they have any questions for that speaker. Next, the opposition will be given a total of 10 minutes to present their case. Following each speaker, the chair will ask the board members if they have any questions for that speaker. Finally, the applicant will then have a 3-minute rebuttal period under the same rules. Following all presentations and after all parties have been heard, the chair will ask the board members if they have any additional questions for anyone who spoke. Then the chair will close the public hearing portion of the case, enter a motion on the matter, discuss, and then vote on the application. If an applicant or any speaker would like to be heard after the conclusion of the public hearing portion of the case, or if a board member wishes to hear any additional testimony from any party for additional clarification, a motion will need to be made along with a second and then a 2/3 affirmative vote of the board is required to reopen the public hearing portion of the agenda item. If the public hearing is reopened, both the applicant and the opposition will be allowed an equal amount of time to provide additional testimony. After the additional comments, the board will close the public hearing portion of the case and deliberate and take the final vote. Again, if any member of the audience wishes to provide testimony in support of or in opposition to a case, he or she will need to fill out a speaker's card. These are available at the front podium. Speaker's cards are not required of applicants since their names are already part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale. The board is a supporter of community involvement, and we welcome neighborhood comments and feedback. We are respectful of the fact that many of you have taken off work or adjusted your schedules to be here today, but we ask that your comments be made within the time frame allowed. If there are multiple speakers, please try not to be repetitive so as to make the most use of your side's 10-minute time allotment. Lastly, I'd like to ask you all to silence your cell phones so as not to interrupt or disturb anyone during today's proceedings. With our procedures now explained, I would like to introduce to my right, Ms. Lisa Wilbanks, who will be this morning's consent agenda chairperson. Ms. Wilbanks will read items 1 through 16 as the consent agenda. Once the consent agenda is read, if you wish to discuss one of those items individually, please come forward and give us the item number, and we will pull that case. We will then vote on the remaining consent agenda items as one vote, and following the vote, we will hear the cases that were pulled individually. Ms. Wilbanks, will you please proceed?
Yes, ma'am. Item number 1, case PD 22-17 has been withdrawn. Item number 2, case SUP 22-21 has been withdrawn. Item number 3, case SAC 22-5 in downtown. The request is a physical closure of a part of Madison Avenue right-of-way north of 427 and 433 Madison Avenue. Staff recommendation is hold for 1 month. Item number 4, case SUP 22-25 has been withdrawn. Item number 5, case Z 22-06 in Hyde Park. The request is a rezoning of plus or minus 2.1 acres from employment to residential urban 3 on the east side of North Bingham, south of Jackson Avenue. Staff recommendation is approval. Item number 6, case MJR 22-49 in South Memphis. The request is a 2-year time extension for a 170-foot CMCS tower at 3014 Old Horn Lake Road. Staff recommendation is approval. Item number 11, case S 22-38 in Whitehaven adjacent. The request is a 16-lot major subdivision of approximately 4 acres at 4934 Tulane Road. Staff recommendation is hold for 1 month. Item number 12, case PD 22-19 in Eads. The request is a planned development to allow a mix of commercial, office, and residential uses on approximately 80 acres at 11945 U.S. Highway 64. Staff recommendation is hold for 1 month. Item number 13, case SAC 22-07 in Frazier. The request is to close and vacate sections of Steel Street and Durham Drive, northwest of Coventry Drive. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Item number 14, case SUP 22-26 on President's Island. The request is a special use permit to allow an industrial metal recycling facility at 999 Channel Avenue. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Item number 15, case SUP 22-27 has been withdrawn. Item number 16, case ZTA 22-01. This is a list of the annual list of amendments to the Memphis and Shelby County Unified Development Code. This case will be heard at the November 10th Land Use Control Board meeting. Staff recommendation is hold for 1 month. That is our consent agenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wilbanks. Anyone now wishing to pull a case from the consent agenda, please come forward and give us the item number. Okay. The items on the consent agenda will now be voted on with 1 vote, subject to the recommendation of DPD. If the consent agenda is approved, only item numbers 7, 8, 9, and 10 will have full independent public hearings. By voting on the consent agenda, each board member is affirming that he or she has read the staff report and agrees with its findings and, where applicable, its recommended conditions. Can I get a motion, please?
I so move.
Yes, ma'am. I move to approve item number 3, case SAC 22-5 as a hold. Item number 5, case Z 22-06. Item number 6, case MJR 22-49. Item number 11, case S 22-38 as a hold. Item number 12, case PD 22-19 as a hold. Item number 13, case SAC 22-07. Item number 14, case SUP 22-26, and item number 16, case ZTA 22-01 as a whole.
Okay, we have a motion from from Vice Chair Sharp. Do I hear a second?
Second.
A second by Dr. Pritchard. Is there any discussion by board members? Hearing none. I assume you are ready to vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. We will now go to Dr. Pritchard for our regular agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We will go to agenda item number 7, MJR 22-50, correspondence to PD 17-06, Southeast Memphis, expansion of used vehicle sales facility into the parcel to the east of 3475 South Germantown Road. Staff recommendation is approval.
Okay, is the applicant present?
Yes, ma'am. Josh Whitehead, Birch Porter Johnson.
Okay. Is there any opposition present?
We hear the case.
Okay. So we will now hear the case. If the applicant will come for, no, I'm sorry. DPD staff member will now share the case with us.
Absolutely. Yes, there's no opposition present, but the applicant did make a request to modify one of the outline plan conditions within the existing PD following the publication of the staff report, which is why we're hearing it. Staff is not necessarily amenable to this request, so we will bring it to y'all. This is case MJR 22-50. And it is a request to allow the expansion of the CarMax located in southeast Memphis within the Polo Grounds North planned development. The CarMax is currently located at 3475 South Germantown Road, and this request would extend that business to the parcel to its east, and we'll see some maps of that in a moment. The area of the currently vacant parcel is 6.4 acres. Here is a vicinity map showing where we are looking. So this is just at the intersection of State Route 385 and South Germantown Road. This is a land use map. Red signifies commercial. So essentially all land use in the area is commercial, although there is a lot of vacant, formerly or currently agricultural land. To the west of this site is the current CarMax location. Here is a view of the subject parcel from the current CarMax location. Germantown Road is in the background and the freeway is to the right. This is the currently approved site plan. When approved by City Council in 2017, I believe the concept was that the subject parcel would be reserved for future development that would perhaps shield the CarMax site from public view. This is the proposed expansion. So essentially the entire parcel would be used for vehicle staging. So it's parking of vehicles, but it's unstriped and it's not open to the public. And no landscaping would be provided in that area. There would be buffer screening requirements, and we do find that this request is consistent with the original council approval's intent, as well as with all the language of the outline plan approved at that time. So we're here today to approve a change to the conceptual site plan that would precede the recording of a final plan. So what does the applicant want to talk about today? The improvements along Germantown. Right now, the outline plan conditions require a dedication of 54 feet from the center line, which the applicant is okay with, and then they specify that any improvements required by the city engineering staff will need to be built out as approved during site plan review. Based on my conversations with City engineering staff have asked Mr. Terry Glover to join us today in case you have any questions for city engineering staff. That is the appropriate way of moving forward. Deal with it with the underlying standards later on during site plan review. What the applicant has requested, and I do have a presentation here from them as well as a handout for y'all, is to add this bold language here. So again, they're okay with the 54 feet of dedication, but they specify that no matter what the city engineer might want, no deceleration lane shall be required along Germantown Road during site plan review in the future. So we can continue that conversation. In conclusion, though, we are recommending approval of this request. We are not recommending any changes to the outline plan besides the change to the conceptual site plan, and we're not recommending any site-specific conditions either. That concludes my presentation. I will hand out these handouts, and I am available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for DPD staff? Okay, Ms. O'Connell?
You're going to have to explain what that, the deceleration lane means. I'm not clear on that.
Sure. So here is an image of what South Germantown looks like right now. So you can see CarMax is quite set back from the road. So this is what would be transformed into the staging area if you approve this request. Here is, up ahead, the driveway into the CarMax. And this over here is the subject parcel. So you can see right now it's a rural street. There's no curb, gutter, sidewalk. It's 2 lanes. Coming in from the south, there's currently a turning lane to turn left along the site's frontage. I believe the applicant is concerned that the city engineer might require a similar sort of deceleration or turning lane to the north, not adjacent to the subject parcel. But essentially, this is what it looks like right now, and I will let the applicant speak further to what exactly they are concerned the city engineer might require, as well as Mr. Glover.
Did we require this of Topgolf, a deceleration lane to turn onto Callis Cutoff?
Mr. Glover?
Yes, we did.
And yeah.
Are there any other questions? Thank you. We will now have Mr. Whitehead, the applicant, who's representing the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to first say thank you to Mr. Glover and Mr. Davis for working with us on this. Before I dive straight into the deceleration lane and the issues we have with it, I want to introduce Brian Pulsifer with CarMax to give a brief description of the purpose and intent of this expansion.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Brian Pulsifer. I'm part of CarMax's design and development group out of Richmond, Virginia. I just wanted to set the stage a little bit about the reason for this expansion. You know, over the last couple of years, since we've introduced our instant offer to our customers, that is a tool available to anyone that is looking to sell a vehicle to CarMax. Since that has been implemented, we've had a high number of buys. And so with that, we are looking for opportunities to store more vehicles on our site to support our retail and wholesale auction businesses. And so this site is certainly a candidate for that. And since we can control that land next to us, we are looking to secure some more vehicle staging and then have a small portion that would increase our sales lot, which is our sales display area, as well as a gate into the secured area and an extra carrier lane. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Mr. Davis has projected on the screen the focal point of our discussion this morning. A deceleration lane from southbound Germantown Road into the site has 2 complications. I'm going to speak to the practical complication, and Mr. Marvin Brown with Pickering, who did the trip generation report that's included as page 24 of your staff report, can discuss some additional issues. But the practical problem that we see is if you see the area of the deceleration lane circled in blue here, it is adjacent to our neighbor's property. Our current parcel I've highlighted in red here. Our expansion parcel I've highlighted in yellow. Next slide, please, Mr. Davis. If you go to the quitclaim deed for our property to the north, it stipulates the description of that parcel, and I've placed a map of that description on the left. And this parcel, Area E, which is to our north, has not fully dedicated the right-of-way for Germantown Road, which is not atypical. A parcel usually doesn't fully dedicate the right-of-way until it's developed. In fact, you can see at the north end of Area E, something that you usually find on rural cross-sectioned roads is that the right-of-way, the property line goes to the center line of Germantown Road at the very top there. So in that section, there is no dedication. But if you read the red description, if you can read it, the legal description of our property to the north goes 30 feet west of the center line. 30 feet west of the center line does not allow us the room to provide the existing southbound lane, a deceleration lane, and more importantly, the grading to build that deceleration lane. So the practical issue here of doing this off-site improvement is we would have to negotiate a purchase with our property owner to the north, who would have no incentive really to enter into that negotiation, A, or B, wait until such time that the city is ready to widen Germantown Road and condemn the strips of land in adjacent to the undeveloped parcels, which could be a few years, and that would probably kill our expansion plans. So number one, we just don't see there's really room to make this deceleration lane from a practical standpoint because we don't own that property, and the 30 feet that is part of the existing right-of-way doesn't allow the room to build that deceleration lane. But probably just as importantly, our trip generation report that was authored by Marvin Brown, Mr. Brown is prepared to speak to this, speaks to the fact that this expansion does not warrant the deceleration lane. In other words, this expansion is not going to generate the amount of customer traffic to any degree greater than it is today, warranting, again, that deceleration lane. Mr. Brown is here to speak to that if the board would have any questions about that, and I'm available for any questions about trying to purchase property to our north.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Are there any questions for Mr. Whitehead? No questions?
Tough position. I mean, I just, not a question, but I just kind of tough position. I think you guys are in with having that development on you, having to improve that potentially. I understand where you guys sit with that. I mean, I get it. No questions.
I have a question. So, and I don't know if it's for the city or for CarMax, but how do we ask of an applicant to improve a piece of property that they don't own? Like, what is the mechanism for that? I mean, if they're in front of us saying, we don't own this property, but it's our requirement that they do an improvement to a piece of property they don't own, I don't understand that.
If this was dedicated, I think part of the confusion is the registrar's website and our zoning, the city's zoning atlas both use the same GIS program. And a lot of times the GIS technicians will show right-of-way where it may not actually be. I think the GIS map shows the full 108-foot right-of-way through this area. If it was indeed right-of-way, it's public property. We would have no argument. We could make that improvement because it would be public land, and we would be authorized by the traffic engineer, the city engineer, to make that improvement in public land. The issue is here, our property to the north just doesn't have that full right-of-way cross-section. It's much narrower, and I guess it dates to some point maybe where existing Germantown Road was improved from a rural gravel road to the existing two-lane asphalt road.
Thank you. I do want to point out that city engineering has not yet stated that a deceleration lane would be required. They don't have enough information provided based on the report provided by the applicant. I do want to just maybe ask Mr. Glover to speak to what this site plan review process might look like if the conditions were not changed in the future, and what that would look like for requiring improvements on a roadway that's not adjacent to the subject property.
Well, as of right now, the requirement should remain, first of all, Germantown is a state route governed by TDOT rules. So they supersede ours. We've got a memorandum of understanding signed with TDOT. We do issue curb cut permits and maintain their standards on their roads for them. But the trip generation report that we received was a little shy on the number of vehicles that were needed. But the regulation also gives us the ability to require a deceleration lane. Its engineering judgment says we need it. Right now, I'm looking at the TDOT website, and for about 6 hours a day, that section of Germantown is running at what we call capacity. In other words, no more volume can fit on the road. A two-lane configuration, north and south, does not allow a car the opportunity to get out of the through lane and allow traffic to keep flowing. That's the reason for the deceleration lane. Now, as far as it being owned by someone else, that is up to them to negotiate with the owner. The decision has been made to improve that section of Germantown. We are getting it in next year's tip cycle, was what I was told, and the configuration of it will change at that time. But the option they have is either negotiate with the property owner to the north or don't expand.
Mr. Glover, let me ask you, why not a merger lane to the south? Did the trip generation not give anything, and that's the property that they actually own, like a merger lane? I don't know if...
Oh, they could reconfigure their curb cut they've got out there and have it all on their property.
Okay.
In other words, the interest they have could be moved to the other side of the property and it could be installed.
Okay.
Without having to negotiate with the other property owner.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I have one. So this question would be for Josh. So if the entrance to the lot could be moved to allow the deceleration lane to go on your property, is that, because I would agree that a deceleration lane is probably a good idea for that amount of expansion. It's probably necessary. So could it be done so that it was on the property that the CarMax owns instead of the property to the south?
I had a quick opportunity to speak to Mr. Pulsifer. Moving the entrance moving our current entrance to the south would remove a lot of the storage area for the expansion area, and it would be very difficult to move that entrance. Mr. Pulsifer.
Thank you. Just to explain a little further, too, if we were to move that entrance further south, that would really disrupt our operations. We have, truck movements and templates that we put along our sites to make sure that we are, we have the proper traffic flows with customers and trucks. And we have gate placements within our site that directly get into our secured areas. So we have our truck carriers our lanes located very closely with those gates so that everything can flow smoothly. And so that lower portion, which is the expanded sales lot, that's a secured area. So having an entrance that would be closer to that portion of the site would really disrupt our operations, and we'd have to reconfigure our existing parking lot in order to make those lanes and trucks maneuver or help them maneuver throughout the site.
So can I ask if they were to move, instead of the lane that we're discussing, if they were to do, if TDOT said, hey, you guys could get away with a merger lane, would that not make any sense? Would that take away from the land that you guys have for the plan that you have?
Are you saying with the current entrance location we have?
Yeah, with the current location.
From our site, an acceleration lane onto Germantown Road, is that what you're saying?
Yes, headed south, yes.
We would certainly be open to having those discussions. That would not be a deal killer, in comparing to the deceleration lane from the north coming south along Germantown Road.
Okay.
Most of our traffic is coming from the south on Germantown Road, which is why we feel there's not really a need for a deceleration lane from the north coming south into our site, since most of our trucking and customer traffic is coming from the south.
Okay.
Say that again, sir.
Fire department, have they commented on this?
No, not with any specific detail.
This facility is getting to the breaking point that it's going to have a second curb cut. That would be a requirement that they would put on them.
Just going to make a comment. I think it's tough to force an applicant to work on another person's property to improve it. I understand the need, but I also understand that the road's going to be improved by TDOT in the future. Melanie Smith Taylor is the one that sold this property to them, and it looks like they did this in one transaction. So you bought your original site and you bought your expansion ground at the same time. So you don't really have any leverage with the property owner to the north. You don't have it under contract now. So it's hard for me to want to force an applicant to improve. If it was in the right of way, I get it, but I think that this is the government's job, the state's job, to improve the right of way for your use. You're paying taxes for the ground. So that's it.
Okay, I have another question, I guess, for city. If there are plans to expand Germantown Road in the near future, wouldn't that do the same thing to the property in question? I mean, if you were going to expand the road, would it be coming from the property that we're speaking about?
Yes, ma'am, that's one of our first steps. We'll condemn the property and acquire the right-of-way needed to put the improvements in.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments from the board? Is there any opposition? We will now close the public portion of our meeting.
Move approval of agenda item number 7, MJR 22-50, PD 17-06, correspondent.
Second. Okay, we have a second by Vice Chair Sharp. Is there any discussion among the board members?
If I was to vote positively on it, I think we should not force them to build a deceleration lane on someone else's property. That's the state's job.
So would we have to amend anything?
Yeah, if you could maybe vote on the applicant's requested modification, because right now it's just a straight approval.
Because I'm really struggling with this one, because I would agree with the expansion, but I do agree that this is going to be a traffic problem. I really do. And, that not just a traffic problem, but it could be a safety issue. So that's where I struggle with, is it really up to the board to make that decision? I do think there needs to be a lane there, but I don't feel like I'm qualified to say how that goes about.
Any other discussion from the board?
So if we vote yes on this, we're saying we're requiring them to include it as it stands, correct?
as it's written.
Correct,
now.
unless we vote separately on the requested modification. And to me, Jennifer, I think what you're really commenting on, you're really voting on whether you're forcing an applicant to improve someone else's property instead of the state improving it.
That's my struggle. Like I said, I would agree with the expansions, but I struggle with how to come about having a deceleration lane when I do believe there is a need for one. I do. I think that is important for safety and traffic issues. But I don't know, I don't feel like this board should be deciding how that lane comes into.
I think one of the biggest things is that because of the state can't approach the other owner and say, hey, you guys have to create a deceleration lane just because we're making improvements to South Germantown Road, that, you know, when someone is coming in to make that improvement to their property, hey, go ahead and do this as well. I think there has to be some kind of synergy there where it could be talked through with the state and the landowner as far as potential expansion of South Germantown Road in itself, period. Just my thought.
I ask a question of the engineer. Gail asked a question earlier that we require this of Topgolf, and you said yes. Did they have to make an improvement to someone else's land as well? Is it the same scenario?
They didn't have to dedicate anything. The right-of-way was the correct width over there. They were actually improving public right-of-way over there.
Okay, thank you. Which, Mr. Thomas, is much more typical. You know, for a developer to improve a right-of-way, very typical. For a developer to improve someone else's property without their approval, or having to get their approval to hinge, their entire deal is hinged on improving someone else's property, and they're agreeing to it, to me, is not right for us. When we're paying taxes to the state and to the county and to the city of Memphis to improve the right-of-way on their own.
Understood. Thank you.
Right. Any other questions or comments from the board?
I would rather see a merge lane as customers exit CarMax to the south. Something in that may coincide and make a little bit more sense than a north deceleration lane. I think something to the south may make a little bit more sense. I don't know if that's something that TDOT has discussed or even implemented or looked at, but I think that would make more sense. And plus, it is an improvement to their particular property where they don't have to go to a third party in order to get clarification or approval of that. Just my thoughts.
I call for the question again. She needs to repeat the motion.
Okay, so
There's
the
a
motion
on the floor
on the floor is
to approve this agenda item.
I second again.
Correct. And so that's to approve it with the deceleration lane still in place. So we want to vote on that at this point? Or was there
a motion for an amendment to that?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the requested modification of the outline plan, and not forcing the applicant to have to create a deceleration lane.
I'll second that.
Vote on the
Okay, so
amendment.
we're voting on the amendment.
Right.
Okay. Is there a motion?
there are no objections?
Oh, are there any objections to that?
That's part of the main motion then?
Okay. Is there a motion for the amendment?
Yes, he's motion.
Okay. Second?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Are we going to do a roll call?
Ms. Wilbanks?
Yes.
Mr. Tolles?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas? Ms. O'Connell?
Yes.
Mr. Gill?
Yes.
Dr. Pritchard?
Yes.
Vice Chair Sharp?
Yes.
Chair Lyles Wallace?
Yes.
Mr. McKenna, did I go?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Motion Motion carries.
Do we need to do a separate?
Now we
vote
need
on
to
the-
separately,
Vote on
Vote on the
the,
whole thing.
now we need to vote on the,
as amended.
That was to approve with the amendment.
okay.
So now we go to the main
There was no
motion.
objection, so.
Okay. We push them together.
Amendment.
Okay.
Okay. And so now we
Go back to the main
need to
motion.
go to the original motion as amended.
Yes.
Actually, I think we're good. We just amended the original motion, and because there were no objections, so the motion carried, so the case was approved without the requirement for the deceleration lane.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
So we can move on to item number 8.
Thank you.
Dr. Pritchard.
Dr. Pritchard?
Yes. Agenda item number 8, S22-34 Southwest Memphis, 54-lot, single-family residential subdivision at 1560 Drew Road and an adjacent parcel. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions and waivers.
Okay, is the applicant present?
Yes, ma'am. Josh Whitehead, Birch Porter Johnson.
Okay. Is there opposition here? Okay.
Yes, Madam Chair. And
So we won't hear from you now, but I just wanted to acknowledge that opposition was here, and we will call you at the appropriate time. Thank you.
And actually, Madam Chair, if you would like, I think that the opposition is here that, and they want to request a hold. So if the board would decide, you could go ahead and hear from the opposition to request that hold and then vote on whether or not to hold it. And if you decide to not hold it, then we can have the presentation if that's the way you would like to proceed.
You just told me that. Okay. All right, if you would state your name and address for the record, please.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can you come to the center podium here?
Dr. Sherry Jeffries, Compton, 5021 Quarrow Road, Memphis, Tennessee, 38109. Good morning, honorable board members. I am president of the Quarrow Lakes Preservation Society. I'm a trustee of the Quarrow Lake Property Owners Association. I am a working partner with MCAP, which you know stands for the Memphis Community Against Pollution. I'm also pleased to say I am a working partner and adjunct member of the Westwood Shores Community Association. On behalf of these aforementioned organizations, and also on behalf of the 9 residents who have accompanied me, and I believe the numbers are growing, so I believe there are 11 or 12 of us here now. On behalf of these persons and these organizations, we ask for an emergency postponement of this hearing. We asked for this postponement first because there was no official written notification to many members of our community, and many members are just now hearing about this hearing today. As you know, many of our residents are senior citizens and do not follow social media. There was no written notification sent out. There was no zoning posting to alert them of what was going on. We need time to notify them, and we ask you to give us that time. But moreover, as you may know, with the recent addendum to your official record, we state that the EPA will be in Memphis on October 18th to begin a comprehensive investigation of cancer-causing pollutants in our area. Accordingly, we have asked Honorable Steve Cohen to include the Quarrow Lake Elementary School property and the adjacent property in the EPA's investigation. Included in this investigation would be an examination of the runoff that goes directly from those two properties into Coral Lake and then dumps into Robco Lake and finally goes directly into the Mississippi River. We are concerned. We need folks to know what is going on. And for those reasons, we ask for an extension. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time,
Chair, I would like to just request, I was under the impression that this was just going to be a request for a hold with a brief background, but I think that since there were a lot of items brought up for discussion, this is a little unorthodox, but that the applicant might just have the same amount of time just to provide that, and then the board could make a motion if you so choose to hold or not. But I think just giving the applicant an equal amount of time to provide some background would be correct.
thank you, Mr. Ragsdale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Josh Whitehead. We object to a hold at this time. We believe that all the required notifications according to the UDC were followed, which is basically a 500-foot mailed notification. We did have a neighborhood meeting on this matter that was well attended by both those 500-foot property owners as well as members of the Coral Lakes Preservation Organization, as well as the Coral Lakes Property Owners Association. There was a notice distributed to the Coral Lakes Preservation Society this past weekend about a meeting they had on Monday in anticipation of this meeting. And finally, with regard to the EPA, this was indeed a elementary school, the site of the Coral Lakes Elementary School. And we know of no illegal dumping or, while the school is in operation, any adverse impact that school had on the ground. So we don't believe any findings of effect would be made by the EPA. But we're certainly willing to go through the process in tandem with whatever sampling the EPA would like to do. So we would prefer to go ahead and have a hearing this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Okay, board, do we want to make a motion to vote on a hold?
Madam Chair, I move that in view of the number of people here, that we hold this item for 1 month.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Pritchard. Is there a second?
Second.
Dr. Stone.
Second from Mr. Toes.
Discussion.
Is there any discussion amongst board members? Okay, we are now ready to vote. Will there be a roll call?
Yes, ma'am, we can do that. Mr. Tolles?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas? Yes. Ms. Wilbanks?
Yes.
Ms. O'Connell? Mr. McKinnon?
No.
Mr. Gill?
Yes.
And Vice Chair Sharp?
I forget who I am. I'm sorry. No.
Dr. Pritchard?
Yes.
And Chair Lyles Wallace?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Yes, 1 month.
Dr. Pritchard?
Agenda item number 9, S22-35, Trig Adjacent, Companion to Board of Adjustment 22-112, 23-lot major open space subdivision at 667 Richmond Avenue. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions and 2 waivers.
Is the applicant present? Okay, thank you. Is there any opposition? No. All right, we will hear this case.
Sure, Lucas Skinner with the Division of Planning and Development. The item before you, again, is S22-35. This is approximately 23-lot open space subdivision to include single-family duplex uses as well as common open space. So the reason we're hearing this, I'll be very brief. The applicant would just like to discuss one of the conditions, and then I would also, the staff, like to take the opportunity to reword another condition. So I'll just briefly go through the case really quick, and then we can go through that. But to give an idea of the case, this is an aerial of the site. It's slightly over 5 acres. Just east of South Orleans, south of Richmond, and west of Roanoke Avenue, surrounded by primarily residential uses as well as some institutional uses as well. A few site photos just to show brief context of the site. So an open field, the site used to be a school. There's currently kind of an old baseball field there as well on the site. The picture to the bottom right just shows a few of the homes that are nearby on LaFleur Place. Picture of the preliminary plan. So again, this was single family and duplex uses. And then there's a lot for sort of a community building, and then as well as sort of the internal open space. So in conclusion, the applicant is requesting the 23-lot subdivision. They are requesting approval for 4 waivers. We are looking to approve 2 of those waivers. So getting into the conditions, there was one letter of opposition that came in very late from a resident on Richmond Avenue. She wanted me to just include this. To summarize her opposition, she essentially was concerned about potentially having low-income housing nearby. So I did want to just bring that up. But to get into the recommendation, so this proposal was found to be consistent with Memphis 3.0. The condition that I just wanted to reword is condition number 3, to include the bolded and italicized language that each unit that does have a driveway shall have a carport. Just wanted to make that clear. And then the applicant would just like to discuss condition 1. So essentially we are having them to conform to the other contextual infill standards, the ones that we are not approving for waivers. And I believe they would like to discuss the raised elevation portion of that condition. So with that, I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Skinner. Are there any questions from the board? Okay. If we can hear from the applicant, if you would come up and state your name and address for the record, please.
Thank you. My name is Joyce Selena Love, and address is 1605 Dexter Lake Road, or Drive, I should say, Cordova. Zip code 38016.
Thank you.
All right, well, the one item that we did want to discuss was, as Lucas mentioned, the minimum 18-inch raised elevations. And this is mainly because the designs of our buildings are so that you have this ability to live long-term. We would love for the residents to age in place if they can, or have the choosing or option to do so, without there being too much of an imposition of having to add the appendages that happen to be these after retrofitted ramps in order to get into their homes. So the way that we have designed the homes is that there's enough room from sidewalk to the porch to be able to slope gently without there needing necessarily to be either any rails or just minimal amount of rails, and just have it grade away from that point where you could have at least a base of, say, 12 inches. So the idea is that with the 18-inch raised elevations, it's almost equivalent to there being 3 steps going up into the porch, and we would just like to bring it down to 2 steps. And this isn't very foreign to the neighborhood. There are several homes across the street in South Orleans where there is a typical 1 step up to the porch and then another step into the residence as at the threshold, or it would be 2 steps up at the porch and then a 0 entry threshold into the residents themselves. Now, of course, we have the other extremes where we're going around the corner in Richmond, where there might be, say, 8 steps going up into the porch. But that's the beauty of this neighborhood, is that there's a huge variety of raised and lowered elevations. But definitely agree with the fact that there should be some raising off of the base or up from the grade of the homes themselves. So, and I guess I would like to take a moment to recognize the fact that we have some lovely residents that came from our neighborhood meeting, and they're here in support of the project as well. And we also have the developer here, our representative of the works, Roshan Austin, as well as we have our civil engineer back here, which is Eric Criswell. So I just want to make sure that they were recognized that they actually came to support us here.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the applicant?
So I am assuming that you would like to change condition number 1 and have it read, instead of 18-inch raised elevation, 12-inch. Is that correct?
A minimum of 12 inches, yes, ma'am.
All right.
So essentially, can I have 2 steps instead of 3?
2 steps. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
I may have missed it. Why was there a raised elevation? Is it it's not in a floodplain, is it?
It is not, but there is a typical, as part of the contextual infill requirements, and this project essentially falling underneath that category. Okay. There is a typical 18-inch as a blanket, and we're just saying for this particular neighborhood, we think it would be okay for it to just go down one more step or 6 inches below that, just because it does fit in with the context, and then it'll allow us to have a little bit more ease to make sure that the residents have full capability of making sure that their elevations and their facades don't highlight the fact should they have to put a ramp or when we incorporate a ramp into their homes.
Understood. Thank you.
So, Mr. Ragsdale, are we voting to change, or is there I'd like to hear from DPD around that amendment to the condition.
Well, and if I can ask Mr. Skinner to speak to that a little bit, but if the board or someone wanted to make a motion to add that amendment to change the 18-inch to 12-inch, then you could vote on that. So, but Mr. Skinner, if you want to speak to the question about how we would feel about the change to that.
Yeah, so I'll go back. Ms. Joyce Salino was correct in answering Mr. McKinnon's question. So it is kind of just a blanket raised elevation number that we have to try and keep some form of raised elevation in homes that were built, pre-1950, if it's in that area. I believe as staff we're comfortable with the 12 inches. That would be fine as long as there is just some form of raised elevation. We're okay with that.
Madam Chair, I offer a motion that we approve of agenda item number 9 with the condition number 1 changed from 18-inch raised elevation to 12-inch. In other words, 2 steps.
Second.
Okay, we have a second from Mr. McKinnon. Any discussion from the board? All right. Are we doing a roll call or?
Madam Chair, I just want to note that we did have an amendment to item number 3.2. So if Dr. Pritchard, if you don't mind, if there's no objection, if you would include that as part of your motion.
Yeah, we can just include it in this vote. That'd be fine.
Okay, and Mr. McKinnon without objection.
Second.
Okay. All right.
Any further discussion? All in favor, or are we doing a roll call?
We can do just a
regular
okay.
call.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? This motion carries.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Next, we will go to agenda item number 10. Is that correct? Ragsdale, go to agenda item number 10. All right. Agenda item number 10, S22-37, Raleigh adjacent, 79 lot, major subdivision of approximately 20 acres at 2722 Epping Rise Road. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions.
All right, is the applicant present?
Madam Chair, it looks like the applicant is not present. So, if that's the case, we do have someone that's here in opposition. So, if the chair so chose, since she is here, you might give her a small opportunity just to give some feedback since she is here, and then I believe we could have a motion to hold. I mean, technically it has to be held.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mimi Sneed? All right. If you would come forward and state your name and address for the record.
Sure. My name is, good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the council. My name is Mimi Sneed. I am a homeowner in the Epping Forest condominium community, 3656 Houghton Lane, number 1, and the community's new 2022 HOA board member president. Thank you for this opportunity to question and seek answers to some concerns that directly affect the Epping Forest community, condominium community. In the notice of public hearing dated September 27th, 2022, regarding case number S2237, a site plan is included on the reverse side of the document showing plans for a new 79-lot subdivision to be located at the northeast corner of James Road and Highland Road. The planned development is immediately next door to our condominium community. It is located on the west side of our property. Of particular concern in the site plan drawing is a shaded area identified as ROW dedication. This shaded part of the drawing is located in the upper right-hand portion of the diagram, adjacent to an area identified as Epping Forest Condominiums, instrument AV 7878. The area marked ROW dedication and the area marked Epping Forest Condominiums, Inc. appear in the site plan to be separately owned, but they are not. It is our community's understanding that this west portion of Houghton Lane is a private drive on our property. Houghton Lane is shaped like a horseshoe with both entrances touching Northcliffe Drive. It has an east entrance, a west entrance, and no other external streets touching it. The reference in the site plan to inference AV 7878 is confusing to us without there being understanding of instrument AV 5297. We are not clear why our private drive is marked for a right-of-way dedication in their site plan, as this should happen on a public city street, which ours is not. Ours is a private community complex, as is its drive and driveways. In instrument AV 5297, effective December 9th, 1983, on page 3, then neighboring property owner Allen N. O'Hara initially granted the Epping Forest condominium community shared access to, quote, the new egress easement, unquote, otherwise known as the road, in exchange for certain property concessions of benefit to Allen N. O'Hara. This access was initially created as a mutual, non-exclusive, and perpetual easement for our community. A drawing on page 11 of the same document shows both the road as well as Allen and O'Hara's future plans to convey an adjacent .897 acre of land referred to as the out parcel to Epping Forest condominiums. As of December 9th, 1983, both the road and the .897 acre out parcel were owned by Allen and O'Hara. However, effective December 20th, 1983, 11 days later, by instrument AV 7878, a quit claim deed, which is a quit claim deed, a .923 acre of property was transferred from Allen O'Hara to Epping Forest condominiums, including all right, title, and interest in and to this real estate. This 9.23 acre property transfer included both the .897 acre out parcel and the road, both of which are identified in Instrument AV 5297. As further reference, please see Plat Book 50, page 65, for parcel ID 083-021-00082, which covers both the .897 acre out parcel and the road. Together, these two properties comprise the total .923 acres conveyed to Epping Forest condominiums in Instrument AV 7878. On another note, the property now being developed has been an undeveloped wooded lot since Epping Forest subdivision was first built in the early 1970s. During the current development, there are no property line markers or red flags to be found. We would like these markers posted to identify property boundaries. And when construction is complete, our community would like to know what type of continuous physical fencing will be used to prevent residents of and visitors to this new subdivision from trespassing onto our private community property. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sneed.
You're welcome.
And we don't have the applicant here to offer any response or, so at this point, we can.
I believe that we'll just need to hold it, but I would like to just go ahead and have a motion second and vote to hold it. Technically, we can't hear it, but we had this issue a few months ago, and we went ahead and heard it without the applicant and had to rehear it. So if we could go ahead and do that with a motion and second and close that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale.
So you would like a motion to hold the item?
Yes, ma'am.
I so move that we hold agenda item number 10 for 30 days.
Second.
We have a second by Vice Chair Sharp. Any discussion by the board? All right, all in favor of a hold?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries a hold for 1 month. Any other discussion? All right, this concludes our meeting.